Welcome to the Emotional Balance Sheet, the go-to podcast for parents with multiple kids, especially those with twins, triplets, or more, who are navigating the maze of modern family life and personal finance. Whether you're overwhelmed by education or retirement planning, parenting dilemmas, career transitions, or trying to define your purpose and plan, we're here to guide you with empathy, encouragement, and expertise. Hosted by Paul Fenner, founder of Tama Capital, a certified financial planner and parent to 4 kids, including a set of triplets. Our podcast is your ally in the quest for financial peace of mind, proving that money matters, but family comes first. Subscribe now and join our community of empowered parents at tamacapital.com. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for investment decisions. Clients of Tama may retain positions in the securities discussed in this podcast.
What does comprehensive financial planning even mean? At Tama Capital, it means a family office where lifestyle planning such as retirement, college, portfolio management, and tax prep and planning are all under one umbrella. But it goes beyond numbers. We focus as much on the emotional side of financial planning as we do on the financial side. We get you. We understand your challenges of building a family, business or career, and a healthy life. We are devoted to wealth planning for families like yours because we are you. Learn how our family can help your family by visiting tamacapital.com. What happens when the opportunities we give our kids become the pressure we put on ourselves? Our resident therapist expert, Dr. Jen Dragonette, is back with us to dig into the gap between what we want for our families and what our families actually want. And for me, it started with a recent cruise or vacation that some of my kids did not enjoy. And that led into another conversation with a dad at a basketball game and an NHL hockey player from our local high school who was a star goalie on the hockey team in this most recent Winter Olympics, which was amazing. Our conversation with Dr. Jen focuses on this instinct to provide our kids the opportunities we never had and how that instinct can quietly turn into pressure on everybody, especially parents. We explore why when teenagers pull away from us, which is what I'm experiencing right now sometimes, is developmentally normal, and why honest answers from our kids are actually an act of trust, and how reframing our goal from raising teenagers to raising adults is something that kind of changes everything. So if you've ever spent money on a vacation and wondered why no one was grateful or felt the weight of the countdown to when your kids leave home, I think this is a great conversation for you. Try asking your kids one question this week. What would feel really good to you? And then listen. Please enjoy my conversation with Dr. Jennifer Dragonette. Normally, we have a topic that we sometimes briefly discuss before we hit record, but we're doing something different. And I'm totally surprising Dr. Jen on this one today. But it involves parenting, opportunities, and of course, money. So we're gonna hit all 3 of these trifecta in one topic today.
All right.
And so right behind me is our Walled Lake Northern High School in Commerce Township, Michigan. And so we're recording this on March 4th. It'll probably air early in April. And so we're about a month and a half, 2 months outside of the U.S. men's hockey team and women's hockey team, because that got some attention, winning the gold medal. But if you're watching and paying attention to where the men are from, our outstanding goalie, Connor Hellebuck, went to the high school right behind me where my kids go to school. And one of the interesting threads, and the thing about the Olympics that I think most people like is the stories and how they set up the stories of all these amazing athletes and their backgrounds and whatnot. And that's one of the threads that I want to pull on, which ties into the midwinter break cruise that I just went on with my family, is about opportunities. And so Connor ended up making it into the NHL. He plays for the Winnipeg Jets in a very unorthodox manner. He was talented growing up, and usually, like, whether it's hockey or volleyball or baseball, you may know this out in California as well, Dr. Jen, but typically, if there's a talented kid, they will end up moving. Like, they will go to a different state, travel extensively. I think we've kind of talked about this before. And one of the stories that kind of came out of this was that Connor's parents decided, no, we are not going to do this. We are going to keep our son playing club level hockey, which here in the Metro Detroit, Michigan area is pretty high. And we're not going to ship him out to somewhere else. We're not going to move. And we're not going to pay the exorbitant amounts of money that a lot of parents put into their kids for sports or basically any extracurricular activity. So they decided to stay local. He went to our high school, Wall Lake Northern, right behind us, was good enough to get a scholarship at D1. I think he went to UMass out in the Boston area and worked his way into the NHL. And I was having a conversation with another parent about the same topic at a basketball game last week. And we both agreed that we wanted to give, every parent I think wants to give their kids opportunities that we never had growing up. And once again, I learned that my triplets hate to travel. We're on this amazing cruise. We're in Michigan. It's literally been negative degrees forever, it seems like. Snow on the ground. And we're in 80-degree weather. And the three of them do not want to be there. Of course, Mackenzie does. Mackenzie's our world traveler. Like, she'll go anywhere with Teresa and I. But I'm having this conversation with Dan. And Dan's saying the same things. He's like, I would never have dreamed about the opportunities that I'm giving our kids. And he said the same thing that I was thinking, but he said it first. It's just, I find it unfortunate that I feel like they don't appreciate it. And that's what I wanted to talk about today, because and this is where I get back to this trifecta of bringing things up, where there's a parenting component to it, there's an opportunity component to it, and a financial component to it. Because it doesn't matter if Connor's parents decided to leave him in the local hockey clubs and to have him play on his high school team. You know, hockey's still an expensive sport. Any sport, it seems like these days, is an expensive sport. And so you have all these three factors combining into this. And so I don't know where we go from this, but it's been, when I start talking to parents or parents bring up a topic to me, I'm like, okay, this is something that we need to talk about.
It's a great collection.
How was that set up?
Yeah, well, I'm with you, Paul. And I hear a lot of threads, pertaining to different conversations that we've had and different conversations that we can continue to have about this. You might have seen me jotting down a note or two while you were talking. And what I wrote is why. Kind of coming back to our last conversation, you're exactly right. As parents, we do, I think we are almost like this biological imperative to give our kids the opportunities that we didn't have. And that's a wonderful instinct. We want to do that. I think so many of us wish for our children to have a better life than we had, or more flexibility, or more freedom, or more security, or more financial, whatever, right? And I think it's important to ask ourselves why, which might seem like a strange question. Why do we want this for our kids? But just like when you and I have talked about money being symbolic, I think opportunities are kind of symbolic in the same way. So if we're, moving all over the place for our kids to do sports, Why are we doing that? Is it because we hope that they will get a scholarship and go to college for free? Are we hoping that they'll actually be a professional athlete? Are we hoping that they'll connect socially and have an amazing experience as they travel around with their friends, right? So the why matters in all of these situations. Why do you want to take your kids around the world on trips if it's something that only a quarter of them enjoy, right? And, so I think there's a few things that I'm thinking at the same time here. If parents, particularly if you have a pair of parents who are parenting together, can get clear on why that's important to you, what it is that you're hoping your child or children are going to get out of all of those experiences, that might shape and reframe the way that we're thinking about it, because it can start to feel like pressure for kids. And I think it also opens up a better conversation with our kids as to why we want them to explore different opportunities or try the travel team or come on this amazing vacation with us. Because we kind of inadvertently can get into some of that make sureing territory that we've talked about. I want to make sure you have a life that I couldn't have. Well, do we know that's the life that they want? Or I want to make sure that you can go to this, fantastic college that has a hockey scholarship. Well, do we know that's the college they want to go to? Do we know that that's how they want to spend their time or their life? So I think as our children get older, particularly as they're moving into high school and starting to make some of these big decisions with us and also for themselves, the more we can get clear on what it means to us and to them to have, quote, opportunities, the more we can appropriately allocate the financial, resources to go to those opportunities, the time, because these all take a lot of time, and have it feel more like a choice or a values-driven family decision as opposed to pressure. You must now do this thing because I couldn't ever do that myself.
The one thing that you just hit on that just sparked this in me is the word pressure, because you said pressure on the kids. But I think, and I'll probably disclose too much, so I don't know if Teresa, if you're going to listen to this episode or not, but I think a lot of times the parents are the ones putting the pressure on. Mm-hmm. And I think, at least from my firsthand experience of being married to Teresa and having this unique family that we do, and having many conversations with other Tama families that I work with, and I know I brought this up before, is this one pager that I provide to families that basically show how many summers they have left with their kids. And I know we've talked about this before. And that thing really resonated with Teresa a few years ago when I started rolling this out to families I work with. And I think she feels pressure. She feels pressure that we have a constricted amount of time left, and she wants to do as much as we can as a family of 6 before they're off and gone, and she's afraid that they never come back. Mm-hmm. So a few of them may never come back. Hopefully a few do. But I think that's, when I was listening to you say that, that's the thing that kind of sparked me, is like, as parents, we probably put a lot of pressure on ourselves. And I know, like, trying to create these opportunities and these once of lifetime experiences, and trying to throw that on our kids, to your point that, that's not what they really want. I mean, at this stage of the game, they would much rather stay at home, whether it's because of, swim or being with their friends, or just staying home because they don't like to go anywhere. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's so easy for everybody in these equations to feel pressure. And it also, it brings me back to that topic that I love to bring in here, which is asking versus guessing. I feel that as a parent. I have, my oldest is going into 9th grade. My youngest is going into 7th grade. I'm looking at this, like, we don't have a lot of summers left, particularly with both of them. And it's so easy to feel that pressure. I feel it too. And they probably do in different ways. And then we end up guessing. And I think the more stress, the more pressure, the more anxiety anybody feels, the more we're going to get into that guessing space. Well, I know we'll have this amazing family adventure, or we're going to pull everybody out of school and we're going to travel the world for a year, or we're going to go on a cruise, or we're going to double down on the travel sports or whatever it is. And that can feel like pressure on both sides. It can feel like pressure for parents to do this right, to do this perfectly. Somehow we might look back on our own childhoods and think, oh, I never got to do these things, or, what I would give to go back and have this time with my family. And our kids might feel pressure in different ways, right? As you said, they may be feeling pressure to spend some of those last summers with their friends, or working, or studying, or getting into school, or traveling, or doing the things that we want them to do.
It's funny you mentioned studying, because Madison was on that cruise with all of her homework.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's true. I wanted to take my oldest to a high school reunion of mine, and he was really nervous because it meant he would miss a couple of days of school, and that you'd have to make up that work, right? It's so interesting, right? The values. I'm thinking this is a once in a lifetime opportunity to see where I went to school. And he's thinking I'm going to have math homework, right?
Right.
And if I had insisted that he do that, what are we getting out of that experience? I'm there dragging my kid across the country. He's stressed. He's not enjoying it, right? So because we can talk about those things, I realized he doesn't care about that. It's not that important for me to have him there. I can leave him home and go on my own. And so I think if we can get into that asking space, and maybe I'll even use that conversation as an example, because I was really disappointed. I wanted to take my kids with me to this reunion, and I realized that I was applying pressure. I had decided it was going to be an amazing experience for all of us. And, with the years ticking out, I'm like, well, it's not going to happen again, right? 5 years from now, my oldest will be in college. There's no way he's going to come to a reunion with me. And then when we talked about it, I just said, I would like to do these things with you sometime. And he said, of course, let's find a time to do it that doesn't stress me out, or I'm not missing school. I'm like, well, that is a very reasonable approach to this problem. And my why was I wanted him to see where I went to school, which could be accomplished in all sorts of different ways. And his why was he didn't want to stress himself out. He didn't want to add things to his plate that were unnecessary. And I think oftentimes if we as families, even bigger families, can get clear on what's important to us all in this situation, for Teresa, and hi, Teresa, if you're listening, if there's pressure around, gosh, I have to maximize this time with my kids. And of course we want to. What does that actually look like? How do our kids experience really close quality time with us? What do they love about spending time with us? What memories are really important to them when they look back on the past couple of years or the past few summers? Because sometimes it's very surprising. It might be that, that hilarious day where we all just stayed in PJs all day and had breakfast for every meal and didn't leave the house. Right. And it wasn't the big expensive trip, or it wasn't the travel ball or whatever it is that we're doing and spending all this time and money on. But we won't know that if we don't ask and kind of let go of our, I'll just say it as a parent, our control, right? Where like, I must plan these things. We're often acting in this pendulum swing around what we wish we had, or, what we can afford for our kids that maybe our parents couldn't afford for us, without stopping to say, is that what any of us really want, enjoy, remember, right?
I think the other thing that I was thinking about when you're walking us through that is, I'll come back to that word pressure again. And again, getting real personal here, is I think there's another level of pressure too that can be created between spouses, because I've kind of backed off on like where Teresa's at today. Like I used to be there, and I backed off. Like when I've asked the kids, like, well, would you go on this again? And the triplets all say, no, probably not. Mm-hmm. And I'm okay with that. But I can also see where it like breaks Teresa's heart, because I think it's this feeling where, okay, my kids either don't want to be around me anymore, or they don't necessarily like need me. And I think that's what's really tough. Yeah. And I can see where she's coming from that angle. And then on the flip side, I can also hear Madison in my ear saying, well, Dad, like when I get my career and I make money, then I'll go on a trip with you.
Mm-hmm.
Like I just don't necessarily want to do it today. I've got too many other things going on in my life. And it kind of goes back to what you were saying about asking.
Yes. Yeah. And, I can relate to where Teresa might be coming from. It's kind of heartbreaking to notice our kids pulling away and maybe not wanting to spend as much time with us, or maybe not wanting to spend time with us in the way that they used to. And the way that I make it through those moments is by reminding myself that this is developmentally appropriate. This is really what they should be doing as teenagers, is figuring out what lights them up and figuring out how they want to spend their time. And it's absolutely normal for teenagers to pull away a little bit from their parents, to not want or need to spend as much time together, and maybe even to explore with the edges of those boundaries, right? Is it okay for me to be honest when mom and dad ask if I would go on that cruise again? And I think it is an immense act of love and trust for them to say, you know what, I probably wouldn't.
Yeah.
Because, if I'm working with clients of mine who have these concerns, I often say, would you ever have dared to say that to your parents? Right? Would you ever have said to your parents, I don't want to do that, or no, thank you? So many of us were in situations where we just smiled and went along with it, even though we did not enjoy it. And, there's a way where if we can tap into the values that we have around that as parents, maybe what we want to give our kids that we didn't have is choice and opportunity and flexibility to be their actual selves, be honest with us about what's important to them. And the other way I make it through these things, which is, if we think of this as a developmental need, right? That they developmentally need to be able to figure out what their own boundaries and comfort is. I remind myself that we are raising adults. Exactly as Madison said, right? That we are raising people who are going to be this young for a very small period of time. And that can feel terrifying as parents because we love them at this age and we want to spend time with them at this age, and we're losing that. It's like, slipping through our fingers. But what's really cool if we turn that on its head is we are now raising these people who are going to be adults for the majority of our relationship with them. Right? As in a couple of years.
That's really interesting because I think we talk so much about perspective, and I use that a lot with people about, I think we talked about this maybe the last conversation or the conversation before that about like looking back, like, do you think you're better off today than you were 3, 5, 10 years from now? And that's really interesting perspective that our relationship with our kids, for the most part, if nothing catastrophic happens to us, obviously we'll spend far more time with them in adulthood than adolescence. That's really...
Isn't that weird?
That's weird. I'm like,
weird.
Oh my God, that's going to sit with me. And that'll be the conversation I have with Teresa tonight.
Yeah, it sits with me too. And I started thinking that way because my husband says that all the time. He has 2 children in their 30s, in addition to our 2. And they are adults and they have a lovely adult relationship. And he says that all the time. And he's exactly right. We are raising adults and they are children now and they will be children for a little while longer. But even then, we see them growing and changing every day, it seems, right? Physically, emotionally, maturity wise, in terms of their abilities. And exactly that. We're going to have decades with them if we're lucky, where they're adults. Right? That where we are 2 adults in relationship. And I want to raise adults who would like to spend time with me. I want to raise adults who want to come on those trips with me when they're older, when they have time, when they have space. And if we pressure them to do the perfect thing in our mind, we're probably going to end up in a situation where they're reluctant to hang out with us, or they're doing it because they feel like they're supposed to. And wouldn't that feel amazing to have these adult people, these offspring of ours, who enjoy us and who we enjoy?
I don't know if I brought this up to you before or not, but maybe because I see it almost every day. So like when I start my day, like one of the first things I do, or one of the things I do with my morning routine, is I write down 3 things that I'm grateful for. And above that are like, I don't know, half a dozen, quotes that are really meaningful to me. And the one, ironically, is by Paul Orfalia. I think that's how you pronounce his last name. If anybody remembers Kinko's, like that was bought by FedEx, he was the founder of Kinko's. But his quote that I read almost every day is, "Success is when your children want to be with you when they are adults." Mm-hmm. The most cool thing I've ever been called in my life is dad. And I think maybe one where I actually get this benefit of being and doing what I do as an advisor and working with all these amazing families at TAMA is I've seen firsthand how adult kids come back and families plan trips or events, with their adult kids. Like I can tell you right now, I've got probably 2 families on college spring break right now doing things together that I know like Teresa would want to do with our kids right now, mm-hmm. but they're not receptive. It's mm-hmm. not what they want to do. But potentially in that next stage, like life after high school, I guess maybe, they they'll be that interest to go and do something with us, mm-hmm. especially if we're paying the bill, I think.
I think that makes a big difference. Yep. If we're paying the bill. And ironically, I think if we don't force them to do it exactly our way right now. And we always want to have a balance with that, that if we're entirely permissive as parents of like, oh, well, kid doesn't want to do that, so we're not going to do it, right? If that's our driving force, that might not feel safe either. There's a delicate balance, I think, as parents where we are encouraging our kids to do things that we think are good for them, good for all of us. We're providing opportunities. I have one kiddo who just has so many things going on that we're like, you got to do a few fewer things. And I have another kiddo who we're like, maybe do some stuff, right? We sometimes have to help them figure out that mobilizing is important or, protecting their time is important. But I think if we're providing guardrails rather than this is your agenda and this is the schedule forever and ever that we want, it increases the likelihood of exactly that, of wanting to come back and, do these things with us or, wanting to connect with us or, you just even have like a ongoing text conversation, whatever it is as adults, because we've allowed them to figure out who they are rather than saying, you must be this way, you must be this person, and inadvertently putting them in a position where they then either have to kind of hide themselves, begrudgingly, come over to our side and be the kid that they think we want them to be, or spend time with us out of a sense of obligation rather than actually enjoying the togetherness.
I think one of the things I want to come back to this conversation I was having with Dan was, something that I felt for the last few years, like when we go on vacations together, obviously as a family of six is very expensive, but they're a family of 4 and they still find it very challenging as well. And I know Dan was saying the same thing. It's like, I want to give our kids opportunities. I think what makes it really hard is that the cost involved of doing that are obviously exponentially higher. Mm-hmm. And he said, and I don't know if you feel the same way, is when he was talking to me about it, and it was, do you feel that like drag, like that financial drag? And I said, I certainly do, especially, and you know us, with family of 6, whatever, that it's really hard. And fortunately we have the financial means to do things like that. But just because we have the financial means doesn't mean that I think it's I don't know how this is going to sound, audience. I don't know if you think I'm crass or not, but there's you don't really get a whole lot of ROI out of it. Like mm-hmm. when you go mm-hmm. and spend money on a nice vacation or time away with the dollars that you have available to do it, and kids aren't happy, I think that just adds another layer of frustration, I think, for mm-hmm. a lot of parents. I know I feel that way. I know Dan felt that way. I know other parents that feel that same way as well.
Yeah. And it can add pressure, really coming back to that word.
It goes back to adding more pressure. Here's the financial pressure of it all.
Exactly. I'm laughing because I am thinking of a conversation with one of my clients a week or two ago who took their kids to a large theme park, which I will not name, but we can all kind of imagine a large theme park that's very, very expensive to go to. And their partner was trying to get every moment out of it, right? Dragging these kids around from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. to get the most out of the experience because it's expensive. And we can all predict what happened, right? We have extremely cranky, overtired, hungry kids. Nobody had a good time. The ROI was nil, right? And that was pressure based, right? And then the kids felt pressured to have a good time as though we can make that happen. And, so I think, again, for me, it comes back to what is it that we're actually trying to accomplish with this time, with this vacation? I think I've shared with you that on my summer vacations where I do take my kids on, kind of adventure time, they sat me down a couple of years ago and said, Mom, can we just have one adventure a day?
Yes. Yeah. Right? I remember that. I remember you bringing that up in a conversation before.
Mm-hmm. And that was me pressuring, like, we're here in this beautiful place. We've got to get all the adventure we can. And that wasn't working for them. Right. And if they hadn't been willing and brave enough and safe enough to tell me that, they would have been dragging around to all of the things I wanted to do, not having a good time, not looking forward to that vacation. I wouldn't have understood why everybody's cranky and grumpy because I'm having the time of my life. Right. And because we could have those conversations, we could figure out some workarounds. Okay, we do an adventure in the morning. I drop you back off at home and I go back out. Right. And that's totally fine. Or we schedule in a day or two every week where we're just relaxing and hanging out together. And maybe we go get a milkshake and that's our big adventure for the day. And so I think just, being willing for us parents to loosen the reins a little bit on what this actually means, why it's so important to us, and again, that symbolism, and I don't mean any judgment by any of this, but noticing, how much of this is because we want to have the beautiful photographs? How much of it is because we want to come home and tell everybody what we did with our kids? How much of it is because you've mentioned, kind of the families that are spending a lot of money on vacations and we feel like we should be doing that too? Or is it like a checkbox that we think, well, we've got to get our kids to that big amusement park? Is that really important to us? Right. And one of the questions I ask myself and my clients sometimes is, if you could not post this on social media, what would you actually want to do? Right. Or if you couldn't tell anybody about your vacation with your kids, what would you really want to do? To try to get at how much of this is actually for us that we want and how much of it is the illusion of the shoulds. Family vacations should be on a cruise. They should be everybody smiling together at the same time always, right? Maybe our family enjoys dividing and conquering and going off and doing things alone and coming back. And that feels really good to us, but we feel like it's wrong somehow, or it's not what our neighbors do, or it's not what our parents did. So if we can take away some of those levels of external pressure, that allows us to get a little bit more clear on what's driving us to want to do things the way that we're doing them.
That's another word we've used a lot today. Perspective. That's really good perspective. Where would you want to go if you didn't have to tell anybody about it? If you didn't have to put it on Instagram or somewhere like that? And I just know my answer was I was still getting on that boat because I wanted out of this miserable weather. And for the longest time, like, I didn't even know like where the boat was going. I just knew we were going to be in the Caribbean somewhere. And unfortunately, Teresa does an amazing job at planning these things. And I just kind of show up and do what I'm kind of told and help orchestrate some things. But like, to me, like, I just wanted out. Like, and going back to like kind of communicating, I think you kind of alluded to this before, and I know we'll probably wrap up here in a minute, but I think one of the other takeaways from our conversation that I have today, and hopefully the audience gets this as well, is to have conversations with your kids about what they want to do and the why, as you mentioned at the beginning, why behind it. Because I know going back and thinking through this time and trying to get away, I was pretty vocal with my 4 kids about, hey, it's been a really brutal winter here. I need a break. As soon as I come back from vacation, I get right in the heart of tax season, and it's pretty draining. And every day I this is where I feel like I've raised maybe some good kids where they ask me, Dad, like, how many tax returns did you get done today? Like, how did you go? How did meetings go today? Or like, are you behind? Are you ahead? And so hopefully I've created awareness for them. Just like I want to create a situation where they're open to being able to tell me honest answers. Like when we got off the cruise, we asked, would you ever want to do this again? And they, 2 or 3 of them said no. Like, I appreciated that. Teresa probably had a different feeling about that, but it goes back to like, the example that you gave with your boys and an event, one adventure every day, I think is having that, trying to have that openness with the kids to be able to invite honest dialogue.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that dialogue, if we can reorient to, the honesty as the currency, that feels different to me, right? Because of course I want, in an ideal world, you get off the cruise and you're like, would you want to do that again? And the kids are like, yes, we'd love to do that again. And that would feel so good to everybody. And if that's not actually how they're feeling, I'd rather know that. Right. Rather than what so many of us would have done as kids, like, yeah, sure. Sounds good. Right. And then we don't really know. We don't really have that sense of togetherness. I think the other thing that I just want to add in here before we end is it is important and fine to also have balance with this. So I know I touched on this briefly that, what I'm not recommending is just this entirely permissive brand of parenting where like whatever the kids want is what we do and it doesn't matter what the parents want. That's not great for kids either.
Right.
It is absolutely okay. And I think actually really important for us parents to say what's important to us and what is meaningful to us, to have a vote, to have a say. And even when my kids were very small, I wanted them to be with me while I did things I enjoyed. And I wanted them to see that I have interests and I have activities and they might change and shift and grow over time. And one of the things that makes me the happiest is when my kids really know me and I really know them. And so we don't have to just, subvert all of our wishes and desires. If you want to go on a cruise because that lights you up and gets you out of the, dreary midwinter and gets you ready for tax season, it is fair to want to do that. It's even fair to drag your kids along sometimes. As long as we're finding a balance and creating space for them to have that experience be a little bit more what they want or have different experiences sometimes that we talk about. Okay, this is for Dad. This is for you guys, right? This is for one of you that really wanted this. Because we are humans too. And just coming back to that idea of raising adults, we want to raise adults that we have real relationships with. It lit me up the other day when one of my kids said, Mom, you really like learning stuff, don't you? And I said, I really do. How can you tell? And they said, well, you're learning bass and you're so excited about it, right? I'm like, wow, you're paying attention, right? And I think us all paying attention to each other is the key. And it's not to say that parents who, are wanting their kids to love the things that they love aren't paying attention to them. But I think, we can have all of this pressure to create a quote unquote better life for our kids without really knowing what that means to them and what that would look like to them. So I just recommend opening up that dialogue. And, if any parents are listening who are recognizing themselves as having been pressuring, just name it. Right? It's okay. And we don't lose anything. And often we really gain our kids' respect if we say, you know what? I realized the last few vacations have been stuff that we enjoyed, and that might not have felt great to you. Right? Sorry about that. What would feel really good to you? Or, it's going to still have to be a cruise because Dad needs a cruise, but what type of a cruise or where shall we go? Right? To just make it a dialogue.
Well, for an off the cuff, unannounced conversation topic, you hit on all cylinders again, Dr. Jen. So I can't thank you enough for all your insights and hopefully listeners will, there's a lot to take away from this conversation as well. So thanks again, and I'll look forward to seeing you next month.
Okay, thanks, Paul. It's always great to talk with you.
So let me leave you with a few thoughts from my, I guess, key takeaways from my conversation with Dr. Jen. I think first is the opportunities we want to give our kids, the vacations, the travel sports, the experiences that we never had, they all come from a good place, but they can quietly become pressure. I think that's what Dr. Jen and I were trying to hit on. And this pressure on us to create these perfect memories, pressure on our kids to enjoy something maybe they didn't ask for, like in my case, and pressure on our marriages when we're not on the same page about what any of this really means. Second, when your teenager is honest with you, even if it's not what you wanted to hear, it's actually a win. And this point that Dr. Jen made really stuck with me. Would you have dared tell your parents you didn't want to go on that vacation? When our kids tell us the truth, they're trusting us. And that's beyond meaningful. And something that, again, so many great takeaways with this conversation with Jen, but that one really stuck with me. And finally, this one reframed a lot for me. We're raising adult kids. If we're lucky, we'll spend decades with our kids after they leave home. The goal isn't to maximize these last few years of, I'm using air quotes here, forced togetherness, but to raise people who want to come back and spend time with us as adults. So one thing or one action step that you can take this week, I know I'm certainly going to do it, is to ask your kids one question. What would feel really good to you? Not what they should want, not what you think would be good for them. Just ask and just listen. And sometimes that listening is just the hardest part. Now that you've made it to the end of another great conversation, are you looking for more? If so, head over to tamacapital.com, where you will find all of our conversations. Use the search feature to find the topic or guest you would love to learn more about. Also, don't forget to make someone else's day by sharing our show. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.